Welcome back to News Talk. If you suspected that Metro didn't descend to its current state overnight, you're right. A Washington Post review of the agency's recent history finds countless warnings that weren't heeded and opportunities that weren't grasped. The paper's analysis casting a harsh light on basically anyone who's had a senior role at WMATA in recent years. Victoria Benning is transportation editor at the Post, and she joins us now from the paper's newsroom downtown. Victoria, thanks very much for being here today. Very interesting coverage that you and reporters Robert McCartney and Paul Dugan put together over the weekend, looking at what, as we say in the setup, represents a clear collection of missed opportunities and missed warnings, frankly, about the direction WMATA was headed in.
Good morning. Glad to be here.
Talk about what you found.
I think the most surprising thing that we found is that going back even before Metro opened, that looking at the various reports and studies that were done, basically we could have put the dates of 2015 and 2016 on the studies, that warnings about the lax safety culture, problems with multi-jurisdiction governance, and financial difficulties were predicted.
In reports, in documents, in printed warnings of various kinds?
Yes. Government studies, the NTSB, Blue Ribbon Commissions, even before construction began.
Even before construction began 4 decades ago?
Almost a half century ago.
Why? What supports that notion?
Basically, Paul and Bob went through thousands and thousands of pages of studies and reports, board documents, National Transportation Safety Board, Federal Transit Administration reports and studies, looking at previous accidents, construction documents, just reams and reams of both state, local, and federal studies.
Is it possible, I mean, reading this, absorbing this, is there the sort of unavoidable conclusion that everyone in the region, from the folks who've been at WMATA to the region's other political elected leaders, to the business community, to all of us as simply as citizens who have some responsibility to make sure our leaders are doing the right thing, are we all collectively somewhat culpable in Metro's demise?
I think ultimately it comes down to Metro leadership, board members and general managers. I don't know that the general public paid as much attention. I think they were looking to their elected leaders and the board members and Metro's governing leadership to keep an eye on things.
A failure perhaps by general managers past to sound the alarm bell loudly enough and to do the sort of public communication necessary to get people in a position to help and provide reform, and to, of course, to do what needed to be done internally to prevent the various issues that are seemingly close to overwhelming Metro today.
And I think, there have been 15 general chief executives since Metro has opened, and I think in some cases they did attempt to sound the alarm, and, the political leadership and the people who controlled the money, for whatever reason, didn't pay attention.
And now Metro's in a situation where it's broadly acknowledged, I think, that they do need additional resources to bring the agency where it needs to be in terms of safety and modernizing its physical fleet and the tracks and all the rest of it. But public confidence and political confidence in the agency is understandably low right now. So in some ways this is a critical time in terms of funding, but a very difficult time to be asking for additional money. Arguably they'll be lucky to continue to receive the revenue streams they're getting at this moment.
I think that's right, and I think during a congressional oversight hearing last week, certainly some of the leadership on Capitol Hill has made it clear that the federal government is not going to be forthcoming with any additional money, and it's probably going to be up to Virginia, Maryland, and the district and the jurisdictions that provide funding for Metro locally to come up with extra money if there is going to be any.
One thing that's worth discussion here as you and I talk, but also in terms as a regional matter going forward, is the makeup of the Metro Board. Metro Board members don't get paid for their service, and yet arguably they have a huge responsibility making sure the agency stays on track. Traditionally, over time, you've had a collection of different people, presumably most of them well-meaning and putting in at least some time and effort into it, but they have not, by and large, been transit experts, and they all have other jobs. They're members of the D.C. Council who have a full plate dealing with all their D.C. Council responsibility. They're members of the Arlington Board or whatever suburban board or council. This has been something that has held WMATA back, arguably, right? This present-day setup this setup that Metro has had for the longest time in terms of who sits on the board of directors.
Well, certainly the multi-jurisdictional aspect of the board's composition has been an issue, but there have been some board members, and there are some board members that have transit and transportation experience. Former board chairman Mort Downey comes from a transportation background. Lee Dormshow, who's a current board member, is director of the District Department of Transportation. So, there are there's varying expertise among board members. So I'm not sure that that's the biggest issue facing the current board. I think it's more the different masters that they serve.
What do you mean by that?
Well, they're representing, various jurisdictions. You have some appointed by the Governor of Maryland, Virginia, the D.C. Mayor, the federal government, Fairfax County Board, from that aspect. What
sort of reaction did your story get? Top of page A1 Sunday, everyone read it. What kind of reaction have you and Bob McCartney and Paul Dugan been getting?
I think people were surprised to learn that the alarms have been raised so often and so early. I think the general public was under the impression that a lot of these problems were relatively recent history, and were surprised to learn that, these have been issues throughout Metro's history, in particular its early history.
And now we're watching as the new general manager, Paul Wiedefeld, tries to figure out how to get caught up. There was that moment a few weeks ago when board chairman Jack Evans said, we're so behind right now, we might have to close one of our lines for months at a time just to bring things to the point that where we feel good from a safety perspective. That was withdrawn as an idea from a practical perspective, but I guess some of the underlying notion behind what Mr. Evans said remains, in that doing safety and maintenance catch-up work by single tracking, doing it on nights and weekends, it's just going to be tough to make up the ground they presumably need to make up.
I think that's right, and I think riders should be prepared for major disruption. It might not be for months at a time, but the general manager has said that he's working on a comprehensive plan. We expect to hear something from him soon, and I think tough times are ahead for riders.
Of course, WMATA's 40th anniversary came and went not that long ago. It might, under more normal circumstances, have been an opportunity for WMATA to raise the flag and to celebrate its 40th anniversary in the beginning of its 5th decade. But given all the challenges the agency is facing right now, it's pretty clear that the decision was made not to have a big event, just to kind of keep the proverbial nose to the grindstone and sort of fix what ails Metro at this time. Victoria Benning is transportation editor at the Washington Post, joining us today to talk about the series that the paper did looking at management failures that were ignored and the warnings that were not heeded at WMATA. Victoria, thank you very much.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Back with more News Talk in a moment.